In the cold metal corridors of a distant space station, a small drake with copper scales clutched a fragile letter written to a gift-bringer she had never met. She did not ask for toys or treasures, but for a chance to save her mother from a life of hardship. What she never knew was that her words would travel in the most unexpected way and land in the hands of someone who could change everything. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us where are you watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The hum of the orbital station Halcyon Ring was a constant backdrop to life in the lower decks. In one narrow corridor, dim lights flickered against walls patched with mismatched panels. Here lived Lyrian, a small drake with scales the color of burnished copper and eyes that caught every glimmer of light. She was young, barely 3 cycles old, and her wings still twitched when she became excited. Lyrian's home was a single cramped unit she shared with her mother, Mirova. The space was functional but worn, with a low ceiling crisscrossed by exposed conduits. Sometimes condensation dripped from the pipes, sizzling faintly when it touched their heat-resistant scales. Mirova worked long hours in the waste reclamation sector, sorting and repairing discarded materials for a few credits. Most evenings, Mirova returned home with tired eyes and hands that ached from the day's labor. Her once bright scales had dulled over the years, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned to expect little from the world. Lyrian noticed these things, even if her mother tried to hide them. She noticed the empty food dispensers, the blinking red warnings on the Habitat Fee terminal, and the quiet sighs Mirova released when she thought her daughter was asleep. Lyrian spent her free hours exploring the human data archives through an old learning console salvaged from a repair shop. The console's screen flickered, and the keys stuck sometimes, but it was her window into worlds she had never seen. She read about human cities, oceans, and traditions. One day, while searching for stories, she found something that made her wings flutter uncontrollably. It was a human celebration called Winterfest, in some places, Christmas in others. The story spoke of a figure named Father Frost, or Santa Claus, who traveled great distances to bring gifts to children who had been good throughout the year. He was said to listen to wishes, no matter how small, and answer them in ways that brought joy. Lyrian's eyes widened as she read, her mind filling with images of snow, lights, and kindness. She rushed to Mirova, clutching the console in her claws. "Mama, look what I found," she said, her voice bright with excitement. Mirova glanced up from the small mechanical part she was repairing for extra credits. "What is it, little flame?" she asked, trying to sound interested despite her exhaustion. Lyrian explained the tradition, describing the gifts, the kindness, and the magic of Father Frost. She asked if he might visit the Halcyon Ring, perhaps docking at the northern port. Mirova's expression softened, but her voice was gentle and firm. "That is a human tradition, Lyrian. It is not for us." Lyrian's excitement dimmed for a moment, but she remembered something she had read. "The stories say he helps all good children. I've been good, haven't I?" she asked. Mirova smiled faintly. "You have been very good, but some things are not meant for us to expect." Still, Lyrian noticed the way her mother's eyes glistened before she turned back to her work. That night, while Mirova slept, Lyrian sat quietly with the console. She thought about the stories and about her mother's tired hands. She thought about the empty shelves in their food storage and the way Mirova had sold her last keepsake from their homeworld to buy protein cubes. It had been a small pendant of volcanic glass, passed down through generations. Lyrian decided she would write to Father Frost. She would not ask for toys or games. she would ask for something far more important. She opened a translation program and began typing slowly, her claws clicking against the keys. No listing for Father Frost, no map to the North Pole, no contact code. Lyrian sat back, frustrated but not ready to give up. She decided she would print the letter and place it somewhere visible. Maybe, she thought, Father Frost would find it another way. She walked to the public fabricator in the corridor and printed the letter on the cheapest recycled fiber available. The paper was thin and would dissolve in a few days, but it was all she could afford. She folded it carefully and held it close to her chest. The station was quiet during the night cycle, and her natural glow lit the path ahead. She began walking toward the commerce sector, where beings from every corner of the galaxy passed through. As she moved through the corridors, she passed shuttered shops with signs warning of fire safety regulations. She passed the gambling dens, where desperate voices rose and fell. She passed meditation chambers that hummed with strange energy. Her claws tapped softly against the metal floor, each step carrying her closer to her plan. Lyrian did not know if Father Frost was real. She did not know if anyone would read her letter, but she knew she had to try. And in that quiet determination, a spark of wonder burned bright in her heart. The letter lay folded in Lyrian's small claws as she stood in the quiet corridor. The recycled fiber felt fragile, as if it might crumble if she held it too tightly. She had read it again before leaving their unit, making sure every word was right. Each sentence carried her hope, her worry, and her love for her mother. The translation program had been slow, but Lyrian had been patient. She wanted the words to be clear so that Father Frost or whoever found it would understand. She had written about their home in the lower decks of Halcyon Ring. She had described the rust stains on the door, the broken air regulator, and the smell of recycled protein that never went away. She had told the truth about Mirova's long hours in the waste reclamation sector. She had explained how her mother's scales had lost their shine from years of hard work. She had written about the pendant of volcanic glass that Mirova had sold to buy food. She had asked for something simple but powerful, a chance for her mother to work in a place where she would be respected. Lyrian had not asked for toys or games. She had not asked for anything for herself. She had only asked for her mother to stop crying at night when she thought no one could hear. She believed that if Father Frost truly helped good children, he would understand. When she searched the station's directory for an address, she found nothing. There was no listing for Father Frost. There was no map to the North Pole. There was no contact code she could send the message to. But Lyrian was not ready to give up. She decided that if she could not send the letter, she would place it somewhere it might be found. Maybe Father Frost had helpers who traveled through the station. Maybe someone would see it and know what to do. She walked to the public fabricator in the corridor. The machine groaned as it printed the letter on the cheapest recycled fiber available. The paper was thin and would dissolve in a few days, but it was all she could afford. She folded it carefully and held it close to her chest. The station was quiet during the night cycle. Her natural glow lit the path ahead as she made her way toward the commerce sector. This was the busiest part of the station during the day, filled with traders, travelers, and workers from many worlds. If there was a place where a letter could be found, it was here. Lyrian passed shuttered shops with signs warning about fire safety. She passed the gambling dens where voices rose and fell in tense whispers. She passed meditation chambers that hummed with strange energy. Her claws tapped softly against the metal floor, each step steady and determined. She reached the public message board near the center of the commerce sector. It was covered with notices, advertisements, and scraps of paper in many languages. Some offered jobs, others sold goods, and a few were simply messages to lost friends. Lyrian looked for a space where her letter would stand out. She found a small gap near the middle and slid the folded paper into place. She stepped back and studied it, making sure it was secure. For a moment, she imagined Father Frost walking past, stopping, and taking the letter in his hands. The thought made her wings twitch with hope, but as she turned to leave, she felt a flicker of doubt. What if no one read it? What if it was ignored or thrown away? She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. She had done what she could. Now she had to trust that the right eyes would see it. She walked back through the quiet corridors, her steps lighter than before. In her mind, she pictured her mother smiling, free from the weight she carried every day. Back in their small unit, Morova was still asleep. Lyrian placed the console back in its corner and curled up in her sleeping space. She closed her eyes, holding onto the image of Father Frost finding her letter. She did not know that the next day, someone entirely different would discover it. In another part of the station, a human mechanic named Joran was finishing a late repair job. He was known for his short temper and his dislike of unnecessary conversation. He preferred machines to people, finding them easier to understand. But fate had a way of placing unexpected things in his path. As he walked past the public message board, something caught his eye. It was a folded piece of recycled fiber, wedged between two brightly colored advertisements. He almost ignored it, but the small flame symbol drawn on the front made him pause. He reached out and pulled it free. The paper felt light in his hand. He unfolded it and began to read. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made him stop in the middle of the corridor. He read about a small drake named Lyrian, her mother Morova, and the life they lived in the lower decks. He read about the long hours, the empty food dispensers, and the sold pendant. He read the request for help, not for the child, but for the mother. He read the promise that she had been good, that she had tried to help in every way she could. By the time he reached the end, something in his chest felt tight. Joran stood there for a long moment, the noise of the station fading around him. He had not expected to find anything like this tonight. He had not expected to feel anything at all. But the letter had found him, and it was not something he could ignore. Joran had been working in the commerce sector of Halcyon Ring for most of the night cycle. He was a human mechanic, known for his skill with machines and his short patience with people. His workshop was a small corner space near the cargo lifts, cluttered with tools, spare parts, and half-repaired equipment. He preferred the company of engines and circuits to the noise of conversation. That night, he had been repairing a malfunctioning cargo loader. The machine's hydraulic arm had jammed, and the station's traders were impatient to have it working again. Joran worked quickly, his hands steady and sure, his mind focused on the task. When the loader finally powered up with a smooth hum, he allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. He packed his tools into a worn case and began walking toward the public lifts. The commerce sector was quieter now. Most shops closed, their lights dimmed. A few late-night workers moved through the corridors, their footsteps echoing against the metal floors. Joran's boots made a steady rhythm as he passed the public message board. He had walked past that board countless times without a second glance. It was usually covered with job postings, trade offers, and personal notices. But tonight, something caught his attention. A small folded sheet of recycled fiber was wedged between two brightly colored advertisements. It was not the paper itself that made him stop, but the small flame symbol drawn on the front. The mark was simple, but it stood out against the dull surface of the board. Joran reached out and pulled the paper free. It was light in his hand, the texture rough from the cheap material. He unfolded it and began to read. The handwriting was careful, the words shaped by someone who had taken their time. The letter introduced a young drake named Lyrian, who lived in the lower decks with her mother, Morova. It described their small habitat unit, the rust stains on the door, and the broken air regulator. Joran read about Morova's long hours in the waste reclamation sector. He read about the pendant she had sold to buy food. He read about the empty food dispensers and the unpaid habitat fees. And he read the request, not for toys or games, but for a better life for her mother. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Joran pause. He was not someone who often thought about the lives of others. He had his own work, his own problems, and he preferred to keep to himself. But something about the letter stayed with him. He read it again, slower this time. He noticed the way Lyrian had promised she had been good, how she had helped her mother sort recyclables. He noticed the detail about sharing her last sweet crystal with a neighbor's child. He noticed the hope in the words, even when they spoke of hardship. Joran folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He told himself he was only taking it so it would not be thrown away. But as he walked toward the lifts, he found himself thinking about the small flame symbol on the map. He knew the lower decks well enough to find the location. He hesitated at first. It was not his business. He had no reason to get involved. But the image of a young drake writing this letter in the quiet of the night would not leave his mind. Joran changed direction and headed for the lower deck access. The air grew warmer as he descended, the hum of the station's machinery louder here. The corridors were narrower, the lighting dimmer, and the walls bore the marks of years without proper maintenance. He passed units with doors patched from old damage and vents that rattled with every shift in pressure. He found the habitat unit marked on the letter's map. The door was rust-stained, and the scanner flickered weakly as it tried to read his presence. It took 3 attempts before the panel gave a faint beep. Joran stood there for a moment, unsure of what he would say. Inside, he could hear faint movement. A soft voice spoke, followed by the sound of something being set down. He knocked gently on the metal door. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps approaching. The door opened a crack, and a pair of cautious eyes looked out. It was Morova, her scales dulled but her gaze sharp. She studied him for a moment before asking what he wanted. Joran reached into his jacket and held out the folded letter. "I found this," he said simply. Morova's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to his face. She opened the door a little wider, her expression wary. From behind her, a smaller figure appeared, copper-scaled and wide-eyed. Lyrian looked from the letter to Joran, her wings twitching slightly. She recognized the paper instantly. Her gaze held a mix of surprise and hope. Joran felt the weight of that look, and it made his next words come more easily. "I think we should talk," he said. Morova hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss. In the quiet of the small unit, the letter lay between them, waiting for what would come next. Morova stood in the doorway, her eyes moving between the human mechanic and the folded letter in his hand. The air inside the small habitat unit was warm and faintly scented with recycled protein. Lyrian stood just behind her mother, her copper scales catching the dim light from the corridor. She looked at the letter as if it were a piece of her own heart. Joran stepped inside slowly, careful not to crowd the narrow space. He glanced around, taking in the patched walls, the worn furniture, and the small workbench where Morova had been repairing a broken component. He placed the letter on the table and rested his hands on the back of a chair. "I read it," he said quietly, Morova's expression tightened. "It was not meant for you," she replied. Her voice calm but guarded. Lyrian's wings twitched, and she stepped forward. "Did you see Father Frost?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Joran shook his head. "No, but I saw something in your words that I could not ignore." He looked at Morova. "You said in here that you wanted work where you would be treated with respect. I can offer that." Morova blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Joran shrugged slightly. "Because I know what it's like to be overlooked. And because your daughter asked for something selfless." Lyrian's eyes widened. "You mean you can help Mama?" she said. Joran nodded. "I run a small repair business. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. I could use someone who knows how to handle delicate parts and doesn't cut corners." Morova hesitated. She had been turned away from so many jobs that the idea of someone offering her one without conditions felt unreal. "I don't want charity," she said firmly. "It's not charity," Joran replied. "It's a fair trade. You work, you get paid. Simple as that." Lyrian looked between them, her tail curling with anticipation. "Mama, please," she whispered. Morova studied Joran's face, searching for any sign of mockery or pity. She found none. "All right," she said at last. Joran gave a small nod. "We start tomorrow. I'll bring the details in the morning." He turned to leave, but Lyrian darted forward and hugged his arm. "Thank you," she said softly. Joran paused, then gently patted her shoulder before stepping out into the corridor. The door closed behind him, leaving a quiet stillness in the room. That night, Morova sat at the small table, the letter still lying there. She traced the edges of the paper with her claw, thinking about how it had found its way to the right person. Lyrian curled up nearby, her eyes already closing in contentment. For the first time in many cycles, Morova allowed herself to believe that things might change. The next day, Joran returned as promised. He brought a small toolkit and a list of tasks. Morova followed him to his workshop in the commerce sector, where the air smelled faintly of oil and metal. The space was cluttered but organized, every tool in its place. Joran showed her how to calibrate a delicate sensor array. Her hands were steady, her movements precise. He watched her work and knew he had made the right choice. By the end of the day, she had repaired 3 units and earned her first payment. Over the next weeks, Morova's confidence grew. She learned new techniques, handled more complex repairs, and began to take pride in her work again. The credits she earned filled their food storage and paid the overdue habitat fees. The warmth in their home returned, not just from the heating unit, but from the lightness in their hearts. Lyrian noticed the change in her mother's eyes. The tiredness was still there at the end of the day, but it was different now. It was the tiredness of honest work, not the exhaustion of hopelessness. Morova's scales began to regain their shine, and her voice carried a new strength. One evening, as they shared a simple meal, Lyrian asked, "Do you think Father Frost sent him to us?" Morova smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe kindness can come from anyone if they choose to act." Lyrian thought about that for a moment, then nodded. She kept the folded letter in a small box under her sleeping mat. It was no longer just a message to a distant figure. It was a reminder that sometimes wishes are answered in ways you never expect, and that even in the vastness of the station, someone can choose to care. Weeks later, Joran stopped by their unit after work. He noticed the small flame symbol from the letter, now framed on the wall. "You kept it," he said. Lyrian smiled. "It's proof that wishes can work." Joran didn't argue. He simply nodded and stepped back into the corridor, leaving them to their evening. Inside, Morova and Lyrian sat together, the hum of the station around them. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. In the quiet of their home, Lyrian whispered a thank you, not sure if it was meant for Father Frost, for Joran, or for the simple chance that had brought them together. Whatever the reason, she knew one thing. Her wish had been answered. And it had changed everything.